Welcome to Babblecom 5.
This is episode 21 of season 5 of Babylon 5, Objects at Rest. Sheridan joins Lockley on a deserted CNC before the morning shift. The new headquarters on Minbar are essentially complete, so he can leave with Delenn any time. They note it's been a year since she arrived, and she wonders where the time's gone. Sheridan indicates, out there. And out there, the rim. Beyond that, the truth. Lockley eyes him but doesn't press the point. She wasn't sure about the job at first, like him, but she says it's grown on her. He says he'll miss the place, but he's happy to be leaving it in her hands. He wants no pomp and ceremony when he departs, he just wants to go. She leaves him before a busy day starts. Talon is trying to get access to Jakar's quarters when Veer spots him and notes that Jakar isn't there. They speak amicably enough, Veer saying he doesn't think he'll be back, which puzzles Talon because Jakar called for him to come from the homeworld. As Veer departs, Talon quietly and expertly hacks the door lock, and when he asks for lights, the computer terminal picks up his voice pattern and notes it has a message for him, which he politely accepts. Jakar appears on screen, apologising for not being there and explaining that with his departure earlier than he had anticipated, he has to ask Talon like this to take his place, to speak for their people on Babylon 5. Jakar breaks it down for him. Whilst he has been much of what his people needed, what they need now is determination and strength. He has accidentally become more priest than warrior, where both priest and warrior are needed, perhaps warrior now more so than priest. If Talon chooses to take up the role, he must do so for his own reasons rather than Jakar's, but he does assure him that he is as ready as he was when he took it up. He suggests looking at the records as he might find them amusing. Finally, he asks him to act reasonably, fairly, and with honour. The rest will attend to itself. A copy of his message has been sent to the Alliance, so he will be treated as Jakar would have been if he takes on the role. Franklin is also making arrangements for his succession, assigning the role of Chief of Staff not to better qualified specialists, but to Dr. Hobbs, a generalist who has moved around all the med labs over the past few years. That's what's needed to do the job in his opinion, and she accepts, which is just as well as he's leaving for Earth later that day. The care of Delenn's pregnancy has been transferred to her Minbari physicians, and so all he need do now is say goodbye to Sheridan, who's just arrived. We don't hear their conversation as they begin to walk together. Delenn is packing up her room. She is surprised when Lanier arrives to help. She hadn't known he was coming, which, as he notes, would have ruined the surprise element. He's on personal leave as his Anla shock training nears completion, and has decided to make it a working holiday by helping her and Sheridan leave and get to Minbar safely. As Delenn hunts for the Minbari equivalent of tea leaves, Lanier looks at a picture of her and Sheridan. Tessa reports that aside from a little Drazi-Bakiri clash over an aptly named layover and a brothel, the galaxy is a relatively quiet place, so Sheridan can head off at his discretion. After Tessa leaves, Lockley wonders why Sheridan didn't want her based on Minbar, and he explains that Babylon 5 is such a focal point for information, she'll be better placed to do her work from here for the time being. He notes that Garibaldi found the same thing, which prompts Zack to wonder how he's doing as he hasn't been in touch since getting to Mars. Sheridan notes he's probably a little busy. And indeed he is, because he's taken over the day-to-day running of Edgar's Industries operations and is calling his first meeting to order. And it's an interesting meeting, because he's asked for all those in middling positions who've been stuck in them because they mouth off, challenge accepted norms. One asks if they're being fired. No. As of now, they're the board of Edgar's Industries, complete with a double salary and benefits. They're to tell him what's been done wrong in the company so they can fix it. They're also to tell him when he's doing something wrong. If they're right, they get a bonus. If not, not so much. Franklin heads quietly to his shuttle, without fanfare, taking one look back before continuing on. ISN's familiar anchorwoman has broken news of the White Star approaching the station, amid rumours of Sheridan and Delenn's departure, which Sheridan of course is not impressed by. Lanier arrives to announce their belongings are aboard the ship, and they are ready to leave. Delenn pointedly leaves the boys alone, and they exchange somewhat forced pleasantries, with Sheridan encouraging Lanier to visit them when he's on Minbar after his training is complete, as it would be nice to see a familiar face. Delenn returns from checking the other room to start their journey, but on arriving to the Zocalo, an apologetic Lockley explains ISM broke their travel plans, and now the huge crowd Sheridan had hoped to avoid is there to greet them. Sheridan defers to Delenn to speak, and after a moment's consideration, she explains to the crowd that before coming to the station, she had to learn several languages, English amongst them. The most difficult word for her was goodbye, because in Minbari, it always contains the potential for souls to meet again. So whilst this may be a parting of the ways, she believes that a part of their souls will remain here and they will see each other again. And with that, they head to their flyer, saying a final farewell to Zack, who Sheridan notes is pretty much the last of the old guard staying on board. Zack jokes he'll probably still be there when the lights turn off. Lockley joins him as they watch the three head to the flyer. They find their White Star without a captain by Lanier's election. He thought it fitting that Sheridan and Delenn command the ship on the way out. So they do, Sheridan ordering the ship to turn to look at the station and match rotation. On the observation deck of C&C, the new command crew and ambassadors are assembled to bid farewell as Lockley salutes, and our view shifts back to the White Star, with Sheridan returning her salute before he orders a navigator to take them away. On board in hyperspace, John is pacing like a caged tiger, and Delenn suggests he goes for a walk as she doesn't need help. He declines, then declares he's going for a walk. Being Sheridan, he doesn't get far before alarms start sounding. A human ranger has found a coolant leak in the weapons system and orders the area sealed off as he tries to fix the problem. Unfortunately, Sheridan arrives to help just before the door closes, trapping them both in the room with increasing levels of toxic fumes. Lanier arrives and Sheridan shouts at him to trigger the door release, and he moves to do so, then stops, pulls back, and runs as Sheridan shouts after him. Abandoned, Sheridan improvises and grabs the ranger's Denbok fighting pike, hammering on the plexiglass door to no avail. Coughing, he tries something else, retracting the pike and holding it up against the glass before triggering it, finally succeeding in punching through it and clearing a big enough gap that he can pull the ranger and himself into clean air. Lanier finally comes to his senses and returns, but only to find Sheridan on the floor recovering. Delenn arrives shortly after, asking what happened, and Lanier bolts. He doesn't stop running either. He takes a fighter and launches out into hyperspace, refusing to respond to Delenn's hails, encouraging him to return so they can talk. John and Delenn discuss what happened, Delenn explaining that Lanier's diary described his feelings for her and that he disapproved of her union with Sheridan. Yet there was nothing to indicate he felt any malice towards John. She says there are times when people act in ways against their true nature, leading to lifetimes of regret. She notes that Lanier was on his way back when she saw him. Does John believe he had a change of heart, or that he was checking the deed was done? John is genuinely uncertain, but hopes it was the former. Yet there have to be consequences for what he's done, regardless. John's lungs are clearly damaged, but he rejects any suggestion that they should postpone their arrival. He'll pass his cough off as a cold, and tells Delenn that what has happened on the ship will remain on the ship to protect Lanier and give him time to think over what he's done. The pair embrace, and to fireworks they arrive to a landing area clearly designed for White Stars and impressive views of the surrounding area. Plus one unexpected view, Emperor Malari, there to welcome a new president to his palace. They eat together, and Delenn notes very directly that he's treating them much better now than when they last met on Centauri Prime. Londo acknowledges the accusation, but says that he had to get his people fired up to rebuild. There is a difference between politics and friendship. His hair's looking good. He asks if there's any alcohol to be had, that perhaps Sheridan has brought with him, but Sheridan says no, as it's toxic to Minbari. He's left it all on the station. Londo notes that his new associates don't allow him such pleasures. Delenn seems to sense that something is amiss, and we see a keeper's view of her briefly, Londo speaking loudly to distract her and get her attention, noting that they haven't asked him about his gift. It turns out to be a type of urn which he says is for their child when it comes of age. He has no children, so no heir to pass it to, and he believes he will be the last emperor, so he wishes them to have it. Just then, Delenn is pulled away by an aide delivering a message. Sheridan is left holding the gift, which he accepts, and Londo says it should be given to his child when they turn 16. Sheridan notes the bottom is sealed, and Londo says it contains water from a river that ran past the first royal palace. In a side room, Lanier appears holographically to Delenn to apologise, but he will not be returning. He stresses he did not intend for what happened to happen, but he sees no way back from it until he can understand what he is. He asks for their forgiveness and assures her that she will see him again, and that when she does, it will be because he has found a way to atone for what he has done, so that even if he can never win her love, he will at least have earned her forgiveness. He hopes that she will think of him, while she says she cannot imagine life without him. Londo wishes them goodbye as he has to get back to his affairs of state and the forging of his empire, and he tells them he has enjoyed this day and asks them to keep in mind that no matter what else they might believe, they are his friends. As he takes his leave, Sheridan asks Delenn if it was Lanier calling that pulled her away, and she confirms it was, but she'll talk to him about it later in private. He asks her if she's alright, and she says yes, she thinks finally she is. On his ship, Londo is commended by his keeper and told he can have an hour free of their influence. He asks it what is next, and it says now they wait for the passage of years as they are patient. As the jump point opens, we see the urn, and inside it, a sleeping keeper. Sleeping, it seems, is not on the agenda for John, however, as he wakes during the night to start recording a journal for the 21st birthday of his child, a birthday he may well not see if Lorien's prediction for his lifespan was right. So he will try to pass on what wisdom he can, knowing that whoever his child is, he will love them, as he loves their mother more than life itself. She will be the greatest ally they will know, brave beyond measure, wisdom and fire in equal measure. We see Garibaldi as Sheridan talks of mistakes and picking yourself up, and Franklin as he describes home not as a place, but where your passion takes you. Life is change. Ultimately, if you stay true to what you believe, things do work out. Fight for what you believe. Never start a fight, as Delenn joins him, but always finish it. Always. So that, in many ways, was actually the last episode of Babylon 5, at least in production terms, because, as you'll notice in the last frame here, this was production number 522. The original final episode was prepared in the time of Season 4, when it seemed likely that was where the show would stop. I won't say any more than that now, of course. Here we stand almost at the end, and I wasn't sure how I was going to feel with this season lacking some of the intensity of the previous. My son and I just watched Wakanda Forever, and he said to me afterwards that he felt he was a bit over the Marvel Cinematic Universe now, because they were bringing in all these replacement people, and it wasn't like it was when the Avengers first assembled. After the mouths of babes, as they say. I pointed out to him that there comes a time when people have to move on, and new people come to have their turn, and in many ways this is that episode for Babylon 5, as Sheridan and Delenn leave the station in new hands as they depart for their new home. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So some of the new command crew we know, perhaps not as well as we'd like, but then again, maybe that's the point too, the wheel turns. Perhaps the most noticeable gap is the lack of Minbari to take over an ambassadorial role in the station in place of Delenn. We have Veer and Talon, who it seems will have quite a cordial relationship, but I'm generally struggling to think of a Minbari who we've been introduced to before now that could fill the role. Answers on a virtual postcard, perhaps? On the plus side, it does leave space for a completely new character, of course, which would not be unreasonable. I suspect that the upshot is that Veer would actually become the most experienced of the ambassadors in the short term, notwithstanding some from the League of Non-Aligned Worlds who are quite long-standing, but don't have quite as much power. I'm not quite sure, in fact, where the formation of the ISA leaves the League as a concept, or what the makeup of the Babylon 5 Advisory Council will now be. This is obviously something left open to a degree, because we've been focused on the ISA whilst it was operating out of Babylon 5, rather than the station's own internal affairs. That, perhaps, is an element of my struggle with this season. With the birth of the ISA, Babylon 5 as a place shifted to being more of a way station where the central characters were just visiting before they moved on. It perhaps lacked the permanency of previous seasons, and as we don't see a huge amount of Lockley and Corwin isn't heavily involved day to day, she doesn't have a second like Yvonne was for Sinclair and Sheridan. So yes, it's still Babylon 5, but it's almost like going back to the first season when you're just not quite sure how everything works and who's who. It's no one's fault as such, say perhaps for the usual network shenanigans from back in the day, when the show literally didn't know if it was coming or going from one week to the next. Season 4 easily had enough material to spill over into Season 5, but I digress. Let's talk about Linear. We have to, despite this turn of events being one of the most controversial at the time for first ones like myself, coming as it did basically at the end of the show's run. I believe his arc is resolved in the expanded universe, but to my shame, whilst I've got some of the collected comics, I have never sourced the paperbacks, and I really should, although I believe it can be a tall order. This betrayal was of course foreshadowed, gratuitous intentional pun, by Mr. Morden during the Day of the Dead. At least I certainly hope this was the betrayal he was talking about. I suspect Bill Mooney probably didn't like this turn of events, and ironically it is very human of Linear to do something this stupid. He has, after all, spent a lot of time around humans in the past 5 years, and maybe they've influenced his emotions more than he's appreciated. Yet he's religious cast when all's said and done, so there's no real excuse for what he did, even with a change of heart, and that's why he's chosen to be outcast until he can find a way to redeem himself. Big ask, given what he's done, and really right now Sheridan is probably only letting him off the hook because of his relationship with Delenn. It puts her in a horrible position, which Linear knows too, which is only going to compound his self-loathing. Maybe this is just JMS reminding us that not everything necessarily works out for the best. He does have a habit of leaving us with damaged goods at the end of a season, let's face it. Speaking of which, let's do Emperor Malari. His new associates, spot his intentional name drop, are clearly well in control of him as intended, and it seems like it was quite a bold move to take him to Minbar, because whilst I didn't remember the scene, you do get the distinct impression that Delenn can pick up on his keeper, even if she can't quite see it as such. I got the impression the keeper told him to snap her out of it before she realised what was going on in a signs and portents fashion. I also didn't remember the predator-esque worldview of the keeper. I think just a fisheye lens sort of effect like my old GoPro probably would have been sufficient, but what would I know? We learn the Drak are eminently willing to play the long game with the ISA, although it's interesting because there's no guarantee the ISA would be controlled by Sheridan's child ultimately. Perhaps it's partly a revenge thing, or perhaps they just figure they'll be starting with a strong base to manipulate. It's telling that Londo is hunting for a drink on Minbar too. You wonder whether he already knows that drink would knock the keeper out at this point, given what we learned from War Without End. It would probably be a difficult thing for the keeper to prevent him doing, because it would be so way out of character for him not to do it on this sort of occasion. I guess it would just try and pull him away. The new ISA headquarters is a very impressive set of structures, nice landing pad complex for the White Stars, and quite possibly the first time we've ever seen them sat on a planetary surface. I think they deployed some landing struts to settle down, although I guess they could hover with their gravitational systems if they chose to. I've never really thought about it before, but presumably Minbar has something approaching Earth normal gravity, as both Sheridan and Sinclair seem untroubled by it. There are probably a lot of details to be picked up in the corridors too, actually, but I'll leave you to freeze frame, as I tend to run the episode in a small portion of the screen as I go. We see pretty much everybody this episode one way or another, which is appropriate. The initial Jakar handover to Talon is clever, as JMS chose to put Jakar next to Talon at points so he was properly on screen rather than just on the monitor image. It wouldn't have been right to have not seen him, so I think we can give JMS that one as an artistic choice. Sheridan finally hands over the baton to Lockley in a nice quiet moment during the opening. We really haven't seen much of Scene C of late, and it used to be one of the most frequented sets, so it's quite appropriate to have it be a focal point early on in the episode for old time's sake. Franklin's departure is incredibly low-key, although we saw him a little last episode. As I've observed over the last several episodes, his character does seem to really drop off the radar a lot this season, unfortunately. It's nice to see Garibaldi settling into his new role in his own inimitable fashion. What else would we expect, eh? And Zack gets a little airtime too, which is nice. The last few minutes got me in the feels personally, because a part of the reason I've been ploughing so much time into doing these videos over the past couple of years is that none of us know how long we've got, and I myself have had a close call that could have left my son without a father at a very young age. I'm pretty stable at this point, but should I go, I will leave a little of my soul here in these words for him, should he ever wish to hear his ancient dad being totally embarrassing. Ha, you never know. I guess I'm almost at the end of the personal journey that opened up the opportunity to start doing these videos in the first place too. We're living in some pretty uncertain times at the moment, it has to be said, and whilst it looks like we could now go back to the moon, we're still busily killing each other on the battlefield. Alright, personal and social commentary done. Thanks for indulging me. I'm wondering if I should do something a bit different for the final episode, possibly a watch with me type approach. I honestly don't know how I'll react to it, if I'm perfectly honest, and it would really need you to be watching the episode at the same time, but maybe I'll do 2 versions or something. I'll have a think. So I'll see you, one way or another, next week for the final episode of Babylon 5.